welcome to the tutorial for the Robin dress. This is a low-cut style dress with a mesh center and then a cute little poofy skirt. This does have internal structuring and boning, so it is an optional strapless dress. This current pattern is available in sizes extra small through 3XL and is available for purchase. We go through it step by step. It also comes with written directions, and without any further hesitation, let's get started on how you can make this dress at home. So you can see I have all of my pattern pieces for the top laid out. This is my main fabric. We're going to exclude that mesh piece. We'll come back to that later. First things first, I'm going to iron on a light to mid-weight interfacing. This is going to give it structure, and we're going to start sewing this side by side. So you can see when I flip this over, I've already added my interfacing. So to start off sewing, we're going to take our center back piece and our back side piece, place those right sides together, pin in place, and sew it down. Once that's done, we're just going to repeat those same steps with our side front, pin in place, and sew down once more. And then finally, we're going to do that with our center front and connect our last piece for this side, pin in place with right sides facing, and then sew down. Once that's done, you should have something that looks like this. We are going to repeat all of those same steps for our other side. Don't connect these at the center yet. We're just going to go side by side first. Now we're going to repeat all of the steps we just did for our lining. So we technically have 4 pieces, 2 lining pieces, 2 main fabric pieces, and we're going to press all the seams for both our main fabric and our lining. And you can use the tailoring ham when you get to those curves, just so make sure everything's nice and flat. Once everything is nice and flat, we are going to start with 2 of our boning pieces. There are 4 total, but we'll do the other 2 later on. So first I'm going to measure how long I want this. I want to start about 3/4 of an inch from the top and stop 3/4 of an inch from the bottom, and I'll cut 2 of these. This is going to go right at your seam that connects your center front and side front. And we are going to sew this into the seam allowance. So you can see I want it right at the center, and I'm going to sew it onto each side of my seam allowance. I'll show you what I mean. But when you do it this way, it's an invisible method. So on the outside of your garment, you will not see these seam lines. It is just sewn into the seam allowance, and we'll do that for both sides of our corset. Now we're going to grab our mesh piece, and we are going to connect our 2 top pieces. We're going to start doing right sides facing. Place your mesh piece and pin it to one side of your top. Sew that down into place, and then you're going to do the same thing with the opposite side. Something to be very careful of when you're doing this is make sure you're just sewing the mesh onto the other side of your top and not your top onto your other top, your 2 tops together, if that makes sense. So you're only sewing the mesh. They're very, very close together, so you kind of have to move the other one out of the way when you get towards the bottom, but you should just be sewing mesh to the other side of your top, and it will look like this when you're done. Before we move on with our top, we are going to make our straps really quickly. You can see I have my 2 straps. I'm going to take these and I'm going to fold them right sides facing, pin in place, and then sew down. Then you can use either a loop tinner, or I'm actually just using a safety pin. You're going to hook it onto one side and then push it through. This will reveal your strap and hide all of those seams on the inside. Once those are flipped inside out, they should look like this. We are going to pin those to our top. This is marked right about an inch from where your seam to your center front to your center side main fabric is. We're just going to pin both of these down right now. We're going to sew these in between our lining, so don't worry about sewing just yet. We are just pinning these into place where it is marked on your pattern. Or if you like your straps in a different area, you're welcome to put them wherever you like. Or if you're skipping the straps, you can fast forward through this. Now it's time to add on our lining. So this might be a little confusing if you've never done this method, but we're going to take it really slow. I'm going to take my corset and I am going to fold it. So we're going to go one side at a time. Once I have it folded, I'm going to move one side out of the way, and I'm going to take my lining and I'm going to put this right sides to right sides. This is my right side to the piece that's on the bottom. And we're going to pin all the way around the center that connects at the mesh, and then all the way around the top. The only thing to note is that you can see that I'm pinning it all the way down. This is just so it stays in place, but you're going to leave about an inch free at that bottom, and I'll show you what that looks like after it's sewn. But you'll leave about an inch free at that bottom center where the mesh is, and then I'm going to pin all the way at the top, making sure that all my seams are aligned. So my seams on my lining and my seam on my main fabric are matching up as I do this. Make sure your strap is also, it isn't getting twisted and it's getting sewn down with all of this. Once I have that pinned down, I'm going to sew everything in place. Once it's sewn, it should look like this. I'm going to trim off some of that seam allowance, and then once I've done this, I'm going to flip it inside out, and I'm going to repeat those exact same steps that we just did for my opposite side. So I'm going to fold my corset in half, and then I'm going to take my other lining, make sure that my straps are facing down because we want those in between, and I'm going to pin. And again, in that center mesh part, we are leaving about 1 inch from the bottom. And again, I'll show you once this is all sewn up what that will look like. And then once that's sewn up, just like we did the other side, we are going to trim off that seam allowance so that it lays a little bit flatter. Now we're going to flip everything right sides out, and I'll show you what your top should look like currently. Everything should be lined. You should have all the kind of messiness on the inside in between, and you can see here is where I left 1 inch off. So these are open. This is so that we can connect our skirt lining and our skirt main fabric pieces, because we do those separately. Now we're going to take our corset and take one side and flip it inside out. You can see I've done that here. And we are going to measure another boning channel that goes from your center to where your mesh meet each other. And I'm going to measure that again 3/4 from the bottom and 3/4 an inch from the top. And I'm going to sew that in to the seam allowance for one side. And I'll show you guys what that looks like when we're done. So here's one side with the boning sewn into the seam allowance. We're going to do the same thing. To do that, we're going to turn one side right side out, and then take the other side and turn it inside out so we can get to where our lining is. And we're going to repeat those exact same steps. I'm going to take my other piece of boning and I'm going to sew that into that seam allowance for the opposite side. Now we're going to turn our top completely right sides out, and it should be looking pretty good and structured right now. We have our straps and we have all 4 of our boning channels. I'm going to press everything down. Make sure this is on a low heat and don't leave it on the mesh because it can melt. I'm also going to do a top stitch right at the top of my corset. You can also do that at the center if you wish. I left it out, so it is optional. Or you can sew down your lining from the inside, however you choose to do that. You just want to make sure everything looks nice and clean, and I prefer to do that with a top stitch. So here you can see I have done that already. And we're going to set our top aside and start on our skirt. So I have one of my back skirt pieces. I'm going to take my sewing machine, put the stitch length on the longest one, and do a gather by pulling my strings. You can also use a ruffling foot, it's up to you. I kind of prefer to go this way because then I can control the gather a little bit more. Once I have everything I like, I'm going to repeat this for my second back piece, and then I'm going to move on to my front piece, which you see right here. I'm going to do the exact same steps. I'm just going to do a stitch on a long length on my machine right across the top and pull everything together until it is gathered how I like and everything is looking nice and even. Now this is my main front skirt piece. I'm going to take one of my back pieces and I'm going to connect these at the side with right sides facing. Make sure you're connecting the right side, so you might want to mark that before you do your gathers. It can get confusing. And then once I have one side all pinned down and ready to go, I'm going to go ahead and do the other as well. So we're going to sew down both of these sides, and the back will still remain open, and it will look like this once you are done. Now we are going to repeat all of those steps with our lining skirt. So you'll actually have 2 separate skirts. You will have your main fabric skirt, that's mine right here, and then I'm going to work on my lining fabric, which you'll see later. Now it's finally time to connect our top to our skirt. So I am connecting my main fabric first, and I'm going right sides to right sides. I also like to mark the middle of my skirt because it can get a little lost with the gathering, but this is why we left that inch off, so that we're connecting just the right side of the skirt to the other right side of the skirt. If you did your gathers manually like me, you might want to fix some of those and make sure they're looking nice and even. And again, I'm just connecting my main fabric skirt to the main fabric on my top. I am not sewing the lining, just main fabric to main fabric, and I will sew this down in place. Once that's all sewn down, you should have something that looks like this. And now we're going to connect that lining skirt to the top lining. So we're going to follow the exact same steps. We are going to go right sides to right sides, and we are going to connect our skirt lining to the lining in our top. You can see I'm kind of going from the center. And again, this is not connected to your main fabric just yet. And I'll show you kind of what that looks like when both of these are sewn down. So you can see that our lining skirt is not connected to our main fabric skirt, and that's why we left that inch from the center mesh piece. So now that this is all pinned, I'm going to sew it down. So now I've sewn everything down. My main fabric is just to my main fabric top, and my lining skirt is to my lining fabric top. And I'm gonna trim down the seam allowance on both of these for my lining and for my main fabric. Once that's done, you should have something that almost looks like a completed dress with just the back open, but all of your seams should be hidden, and we are gonna start working on our zipper. To place our zipper, we're gonna lay out our skirt like this, and we're gonna take our lining and put that up above our main fabric, because we're gonna connect the zipper to our main fabric first. Once that's all laid out, I'm gonna take my zipper and open it. Once I've got it open, I'm going to take it and flip it so that the teeth are facing away from the center back. This is how you want to do this, so then when it's sewn on, it looks nice and neat and your seams are hidden on the inside. So I'm going to pin this again with my teeth facing away from the center back. Once everything is all pinned in place and looks nice and ready to go, I'm going to take this back to my sewing machine and sew this down with a zipper foot. Once you're done, it should look like this. Here's my zipper. Before we go to the next side, I like to zip this up and then take a piece of chalk and mark where it hits that center seam. So that way when you go to the other side, you know that your zipper is going to be even. So I take my chalk, unzip it, and then I'm going to follow the same steps that we did with the other one. I'm going to turn my teeth away from the center back, and I'm going to make sure that my chalk is lining up with that waist seam, and then pin everything in place. Once I have that all pinned and everything looks good, I'm going to take that over again to my sewing machine and sew it down with my zipper foot. Then I would suggest making sure your zipper zips well, everything looks aligned, and you are ready to go. And we're going to connect the bottom of that skirt piece and finish everything off. You can see I leave a little bit of a tail on the zipper. This is so I can pull it away and I can really make sure that I'm getting underneath that zipper, because I'm going to sew my two main fabric pieces and make sure I really sew right up to where that zip line ends. So I'm going to pin these in place and also all the way down, connecting the main fabric of my skirt so that now my main fabric is all the way closed up and nice. Once that's done, it should look like this. We're gonna turn that right sides out once again and unzip everything, and we're gonna work on connecting our lining. Now that everything's right side out, I'm going to start the same way that we started when we put in our zipper for the main fabric. I'm gonna take my lining and place it all the way outside, and you can see the teeth are still facing away from the center back, and I'm gonna take the lining that's on the same side and pull it up and over so it is right sides facing, and then I'm going to pin that to my zipper. I like to start with the waist seam because I want to make sure my lining waist and my main fabric waist are lining up, and we're going to pin this all the way down until we were at the same point where we stopped at the zipper on the other side. And I'm going to go ahead and do that for both sides so you can see aligning my waist seams, and then it is right side spacing, my lining is meeting my main fabric, and the zipper teeth are facing away from the center back as they are sandwiched in between those layers, and we're going to sew that in place. Once all that's sewn down, it should look like this, and then just like we did with our main fabric, we are going to close up that center back, making sure we get right where we stopped at the zipper and pull that zipper end away, so all the way down so that our lining is completely closed. Now we'll flip everything right sides out, and you should have a very nice looking zipper, both from the outside and the inside. All of your seams should be hidden. Make sure you zip up your zipper, everything is looking right, and your dress should look something like this. And now we are going to go ahead and hem our dress. We're going to hem our dress with our main fabric separate from our linings because it's a really short skirt and it's flowy. So when you move around, you kind of want to have that underneath lining to make sure that the good stuff's hidden. So we're going to do a rolled hem. I'm going to take my main fabric first, and I'm going to roll over just once and pin down into place all the way across my dress. And then once this is pinned into place, I will sew everything down. Once you've sewn that first roll down, it will look like this. We're going to trim off any excess fabric. That'll help everything look nice and flat. Once we've done that, we are going to fold over once more, concealing all of our raw edges, and we are going to pin that down into place. Once that's pinned down, we will sew all of those so all of our raw edges are concealed. And then we're just going to press it down so it looks nice and crisp, so we have a nice hem. We're going to repeat all of those steps for our lining because, again, our main fabric and our lining are going to be separate. So it'll both look like this once you're done. Now for our very last step, I specifically leave this last for a reason because everyone likes their straps differently. If you didn't do straps, obviously you can skip this, but you should put your dress on and see how you want your straps. I've already done that and cut them. Once I've decided how I want my straps, I'm going to place them where it's marked on the pattern or where you feel most comfortable and pin those into place. And then I'm going to sew this right where my top stitch was so there isn't any extra stitching on the outside. Once that's sewed down, I'm going to trim off the excess. You can see, again, I stitched this right where my top stitching is, so there's no more stitching on the outside. I'm just going to trim off those straps, and then that is your last step, and you've completed the robin dress pattern. As always, please don't hesitate to ask me any questions. I hope you enjoy your new dress, and make sure you follow along for updates on new dress patterns and sewing tutorials. Happy sewing!